Hi, I'm Yongchang. I'm recording this video as a teaching demonstration to apply for a position as modern Chinese history lecturer. This teaching demo is about the Opium War. We are very familiar with the Opium War. It was a war between China and Britain. Lin Zexu forbidden opium in Guangzhou, which led to the outbreak of the war. China lost the war. After the war, an unequal trade the Treaty of Nanking was signed by both sides. This was regarded as a kind of humiliation for China and as the beginning of the Chinese modern history. All those narratives on the Opium War are correct, but today we will try to explore some more details behind those narratives. Several questions may be helpful for us to revisit the Opium War. We all know that this war is about opium, but between China and Britain, why opium became so important? Apart from opium, is there a more fundamental cause behind the war? Should the dispute be solved while war? And we also should ask, after the war, along with Treaty of Nanjing, what had changed for China? Now, let us try to find answers for those questions. When we talk about the Opium War, we should try to understand the worldview of China before the war. Briefly speaking, China regarded the world as a Tianxia system. All countries in the Tianxia system could be divided into three groups. The most important group, we called it the Scenic Zone, which includes China, of course, and some countries which accept Chinese culture, such as Korea, Vietnam, and Japan. This is the Zhonghua Wenhua The Scenic Zone was the core of the Tianxia system. Outside is the Inner Asia system, including some Inner Asia tribute and some countries. And the most outsiders are regarded as barbarians at further distance. China's foreign relations with other countries was based on this idea. As China regarded itself as the center of the Tianxia, other countries should send embassies to Beijing to show their respect and obedience to Chinese emperor. As a reward for their loyalty, the emperor would regard them as part of Chinese culture and grant them the right to trade with China. However, in this system, we can't find the position for those Western nations. We know that at the beginning of the 18th century, Western countries were expanding their influence all over the world, and the Far East was an important part. Great Britain tried to establish official diplomatic relations with China, and several embassies were sent to China. In 1793, Lord Macartney was sent from England to China to celebrate the Qianlong Emperor's birthday. 1816, the General Governor of India, Lord Amherst, was sent to China too. Their request was very clear: building a diplomatic relation with China as equal partners, opening Chinese domestic market to British merchants. They also wanted to rent a land or island like Macao as the treaty basement. All those requirements seemed quite fair. However, at this moment, China was confident with its own culture, its wealth, and its power. The Qianlong Emperor and the Jiaqing Emperor said no to those invitations from Britain. Although formal diplomatic relations did not exist, the trade between China and Britain had its own way to survive. This is the Canton system. Qing government was often blamed for its passive foreign trade policy. However, the so-called closed-lock policy, 闭关锁国, did not mean cutting off all trade relations. Qing set up four customers to manage the foreign trade. They were in Canton, Fujian, Zhejiang, and Jiangsu. But Western merchants were only allowed to trade under the Canton custom. This was the so-called one-pot system or canton system called by the Westerns. Let us have a look at the old map of the Canton city. Look at here. Outside of the southwest of the city, along the Pure River, it was the location of the Canton Custom House and the foreign factories. This is where the trade happens. This is another painting showing the process of the treaty in Canton. Let us have a look at how the Canton system operated. First, merchants from Britain or other countries who wanted to do business with China came to Macao. Then they asked permission from the Canton custom. Then they went to Canton, live in the foreigner factories. But Western merchants was not allowed to do business with Chinese directly. They needed to find the middleman, a group of Chinese who got the monopoly from the government. They were called Gonghang. You must have heard of the Shisanhang. That's it. And the foreign merchants paid Gonghang for helping them buying Chinese goods. And they got the goods. They must leave Canton, came back to Macao. And then, from Macao, they departed back to Europe with Chinese goods. The Canton system seemed a good solution for both sides. While Canton system, China government avoided the formal diplomatic relations with Western countries. For British merchants, they could buy Chinese goods at Canton and made great profit by this trade. However, Canton system was not as perfect as it looked like. The Gonghang corruption was very serious. Lacking the official representatives, foreign merchants' behavior was not well regulated, and the merchants also complained the limitation of the trade season and the location. And there was still one big problem, the trade deficit. Let us have a look at the cash and cargo flow and Canton system. China exports tea, silk, and porcelain to Western Europe. Chinese tea was very popular in Britain. More and more English families got used to enjoy the afternoon tea as a fashion. According to one investigation, the London workers would like to spend about 5% of their total income on tea. So, British merchants bought quite a lot of tea from China. However, British products was not popular in China. So, British have to pay Chinese tea with the silver they got from its colonies, such as American, Indian. Under this situation, China, rather than the Britain, got the fortune from those colonies. As the silver produced in America declined at the beginning of the 19th century, British found that they did not have enough money to pay China for the tea. British had to provide a kind of product to balance the trade deficit. So, here was the opium. Opium was not new in China. It was used for medical purpose. But by the middle of Qing, people began to use opium as drug, and the consumption of opium increased in China. So British merchants began to grow opium in India and then transport it to China. According to the research by a scholar, Lin Manhong, she listed the amount of the opium imported into China before the Opium War. Let's have a look. At 1804, less than 3,000 chests of opium was imported into China, but the amount grew very quickly. When the British Indian Company lost its monopoly in Chinese trade, more private merchants took part in the opium trade. The opium trade doubled very soon. So, when we put opium in this circle, we found that the situation changed. The demand of opium was so large that China had to pay silver to British. And thanks to opium, Britain could keep buying tea from China. At the same time, they kept the fortune from the colonials. This was a good solution for Britain, but for China, it was not. Opium became a very severe social problem for China. First, opium trade was always illegal in China. The Chinese government could not control the opium trade by the Gonghan system, and they also could not tax the opium. And opium trade caused the outflow of the silver. Silver and copper was used as cash in China, and the stable rate between silver and copper was important. As the silver ran out of China as a result of the opium trade, the balance was broken and disturbed Chinese domestic financial system. More important, the opium as a kind of drug was corrupting Chinese people. The opium from India was easier to get addicted. More and more people were smoking opium now, including government officials, soldiers. In Suzhou City, it was said there were more than 100,000 people smoking opium. The Chinese government had to solve this problem. In 1838, Emperor Daoguang appointed Lin Zexu as commissioner to Canton to solve the opium problem. Lin was regarded as the capable, determined officer. He decided to forbid the opium trade totally. When he arrived in Canton, he employed different strategies on both Chinese and British to reach his goal. For Chinese, he set up rehab house to help those smokers quitting opium, punished those heavy smokers. And for Chinese merchants who smuggle opium, Lin arrested them and confiscated their opium. Some Chinese merchants were even executed. But for foreign merchants, Lin was very cautious, at the beginning at least. At first, Lin did not plan to punish the British merchants directly. He sought help from the British government. Lin even wrote a letter to Queen Victoria, asking her help to regulate those British merchants and the opium trade. This letter was never received by Queen Victoria, but we could find Lin Zexu's argument in this letter. Let's have a look. Lin pointed out the smoking of opium was very strictly forbidden by your country. Why do you let it be passed on to harm of other countries? And often he asked the queen to check your wicked and sniffed your vicious people before they came to China, in order to guarantee the peace of your nation. Those requests was quite fair, but as we mentioned, this letter never found Victoria, and Lin Zexu did not receive any feedbacks. So Lin Zexu decided to take some tough actions to those British merchants. First, Lin Zexu sent soldiers to block the foreign factories in Canton, cutting off the food and water supplies. Lin Zexu wanted to compel them hand in their opium and sign an agreement to give up the opium trade. The foreign merchants gave in. They handed in almost 20,000 chest opium to Lin Zexu. Those opium was destroyed at Humen. This was a big victory for Lin, but those merchants would not sign the agreement. So Lin Zexu expelled them from Canton to Macao. Charles Elliot, as British business superintendent in China, tried to protect British interests, but it did not work. Both sides would not give in, and tension between China and Britain lasted. And then an incident intensified the conflict. Several British soldiers killed a Chinese man, Lin Weiqi, by accident. Lin Zexu wanted to trial those murders by Chinese law, but Elliot insisted that they would be sent back to Britain, be tried by British law. Both sides would not settle. In September 9, 1839, A conflict broke out between Chinese Navy and the British Navy, and on January 30, the British Parliament voted and decided to declare war to China. This was the Opium War. This war lasted for 3 years. Here is a map showing the process and the battles in the war. But we don't have enough time for the details. Simply speaking, this war could be divided into 3 phases. During the first phase, British Navy attacked Guangzhou and several coastal cities of China. The emperor was not happy, and Lin Zexu was dismissed. Lin Zexu's successor, Qi Shan, drafted a treaty with Elliot. This was the Chuanbi Treaty, Chuanbi 条约, but both China and Britain was not satisfied with the treaty, and the war carried on. During the second phase, British occupied the Canton City, and the local people at Sanyuanli fought back British troops, and then Portugal was appointed as British commander. He decided to attack Chinese coastal cities again. This was the third phase. Benefit from the Industrial Revolution, British troops was equipped with more powerful rifle guns, gunboats, and cannons. They got one victory after another, and in the summer of 1842, they entered the Yangtze River and was going to attack Nanjing, the most important city in East Asia, East China at that time. Finally, the Qing government realized that they could not defend the British gunboats, and there was no way they could beat British Navy out of China. Daoguang Emperor sent his representatives to negotiate with Britain, and they reached an agreement to end the war. On 29 August 1842, the Treaty of Nanking was signed. This treaty contained 13 articles. Most of them was the requirements from Britain. This was the original copy of this treaty. It was written in both English and Chinese. If you are interested, you can read the full text in the first reading section. But we won't check those articles one by one. Let me summarize the main points and find out what Britain got from this treaty. Firstly, China was forced to open 5 port cities to Britain, including Canton, Amo, Fuzhou, Ningbo, and Shanghai. Britain could live in those cities and do business directly with Chinese. This declared the end of the Gonghang monopoly. Britain also got the extraterritoriality in those cities. British was permitted to establish consulates in those cities. They provided protection for British. Any British man who committed crime in China would be tried by British law rather than Chinese law. And British also got a huge amount of money as a payment, 20 million in total. Part of it was compensation for the opium destroyed by Lin Zexu. The other part was to cover the cost of the British military activities. As China could not give out the money at once, they have to deposit the custom income as mortgage, so China lost its tariff autonomy. Hong Kong Island was ceded to Britain as an open port in Far East to protect the British business and military interests. Treaty of Nanjing was not the end. A supplement treaty was signed for the further details, and then other Western powers following Britain, forced China to sign some similar treaties. The Treaty of Wangxia with the United States and the Treaty of Wanpu with France. And now let us review what we know about the Opium War. Opium was the direct cause of the conflict between Qing China and Britain. But behind opium, it was the conflict of 2 empires. Qing China Emperor and Britain Emperor. Qing China wanted to hold the tributary system, canton system. All those are old order. But Britain Empire was expanding its influence all over the world. They would like to bring the new orders to China, the British order, even by military means. So the conflict was unavoidable somehow. Lost the war, the old order, the tribute system was broken, and the new order, we called it the treaty port system, was building up in China. China could not isolate itself from the world anymore. It was forced to face the challenges from the Western. John Fairbank, an American scholar who are famous in Chinese history study, put forward the impact and response framework. He said China was struggle to respond the impacts from Western world, military, economic, political, cultural, and so on. Although this framework got critics because it was too Western-centric, we must admit that Western influences are important in modern Chinese history. From late Qing to Republic of China, even to the People's Republic of China, we have been looking for a better answer for those questions. How should we deal with the Western world? Following this clue, we would have a better understanding of the modern Chinese history. In fact, the Opium War was so important to China. There are a lot of interesting and important details on the war, but we do not have time to discuss them here. Here are some further readings. They may be helpful for you to understand some specific topics on the war, and you can choose to read them based on your own interests.